Welcome to Duncan Thorin Shield's YouTube channel. I managed to con Duncan into convincing his friend to pay me thousands and thousands of dollars as a professional Counter-Strike player, so maybe he can convince you that some of his analysis is correct.
It's finally been confirmed that olofmeister will be making his return to FaZe, playing for them at the next E-League season. So that means Kroman is no longer standing in for them, and quite frankly, let's just start there. Not that really big a deal that they don't have Kroman anymore. They had similar level of success when they had Exist. He also was able to be swapped out. Still no problem there. I think people overblew how good Kroman was, what he added to the team. Now listen, certainly he did a decent job. In fact, for the expectations of what coming in, he did a very good job. He played well. He was fairly consistent. He didn't look too lost in the team all in all. Obviously, he didn't have a lot of experience at the top level, but nothing irreplaceable about what he did in the team. I certainly don't think he was better than olofmeister when olofmeister was in FaZe, or could play the role that olofmeister did in FaZe. So commendable job by him. He's obviously put himself on the map, put himself on the market, as it were, but I don't think it was reasonable to ever think adding him as a player was the right solution just because they won ESL 1 Belo Horizonte with no Astralis and no FaZe in attendance. Astralis and Na'Vi. Now, sure, it's surprising that Kroman succeeded in as much as he's a guy coming in without experience and then he's getting thrust into a top team. Yes. Likewise, if you think about it really, I think the part that's undersold about FaZe is it's surprising how well they did generally with stand-ins. It's one thing if you ever stand in for one event or two events, people just haven't got a bead on how you're going to play with that guy, or you switch things up a little bit, or for a time he can fill in the role of someone else, but then eventually you have to fix things. No, what was weird about this scenario for me is that here's a guy where, this is getting annoying, he's a guy where, a team rather, where using these two different stand-ins, very different players as well, they had this success, these many top 4 finishes. They obviously won a title or two. That doesn't really come down to the stand-in for me. I mean, first of all, Carrigan's an amazing in-game leader, and he's an amazing in-game leader at taking a lineup, very briefly figuring out how to use those pieces, and immediately, in a very pragmatic sense, being able to implement that in the server and have a chance to win this game right here. Not the one 3 months from now, not trying to get to the absolute peak of the players and all this stuff. Win right now. He's done that in the past when he's been in teams, like when he first joined FaZe, and each different lineup he's using, he's still making playoffs at every tournament. Got Nico, instantly one of the best teams in the world. Got Guardian and Olof. Only took him 2 events to become one of the best teams in the world, if not the best team in the world. Then obviously he came along, used these stand-ins, immediately having great success. This is a guy where the thread there isn't stand-ins in different players. It's Carrigan making use of whoever he has immediately. That's always been his system. That's always been his style of calling. It's a bit looser, but it's based around how he feels the game, how he reads the game, and he has a good sense for what roles someone should do and what they're capable of doing. There's a key aspect. Doesn't ask too much of players. Then you've got to add that when they had a stand-in, they were less pressured. They weren't the number 1 team in the world. They weren't expected to win every tournament. It wasn't anymore, wow, you have Guardian, Nico, olofmeister, Rain. Why didn't you win this tournament? No, now it was like, you don't even have a full lineup. Okay, well, fair enough. Let's see what you can do. What semi-finals? What, you won the tournament? Fucking hell, that's amazing. Totally different mental state of affairs. But that's not where FaZe wants to be. FaZe wants that pressure because the pressure comes from being number 1 in the world, from being expected to win the tournaments because you are the best team. So all in all, I think you've got to look at the stand-ins they had and look at the performances they had with those stand-ins before you can reasonably assess the fact that they weren't actually as good a team with the stand-ins as they were with olofmeister, even though with olofmeister, yeah, they went a full few months without winning any big titles, and they won some titles now. Winning alone doesn't mean you're a better team. So let's look at these results that they had, okay? They went to, let's see, 6 different tournaments with stand-ins. So the first tournament they had was DreamHack Marseille, DreamHack Masters Marseille, where they finished top 8. It was actually the worst result of all the time they had a stand-in. But you know what? Actually, the top 8 there isn't quite as bad as it looks, because we don't really know how they could have done in the playoffs there, because they drew Astralis in the round of 8. That was the first tournament where Astralis was God mode, and Astralis beat them. So who knows if they'd have played a different squad in the round of 8 with a different draw, if they could have got to semis or they could have got to the final. We can't really know. Now, they did lose to Cloud9 at that tournament in a best of 3, so it certainly wasn't looking good to start out with. But okay, since Astralis won the tournament, you could kind of put a bit of a question mark. Maybe it was possible to do better there. Then they go to IEM Sydney. This was the one where everyone remembers they won the tournament, and it was a big tournament, and it had Na'Vi, and it didn't have Na'Vi, it had Astralis and all these top teams there. The part that people don't stop and think about, though, is this FaZe team was garbage at that tournament right up until the final. They had this best of 3 loss to Renegades, absolutely not an elite team. They had a scenario where they played against, I think they played against Cloud9, the lower bracket. Cloud9 was already a fucked team at that point in time. They played against SK Gaming, who was a mess of a squad and way, way worse than the name suggests. They got to the final after beating Tai Lu in 3 maps. Very inexperienced Tai Lu, a squad that's never been an elite team, was having their first big placing, still got a map taken off from there. They get to the final, they play an amazing final, a really fantastic one, a lot of individual plays on display, and amazingly, they managed to win 3-0, but an incredibly close 3-0, one of the closest best of 5s we've ever had. You know what, props to them. They got it together in the final, they were veterans, some of their great players did amazing shit, won amazing clutches, great, you win a big title. That right there, after the whole of DreamHack Marseille and everything up to the final, is the big outlier. What the fuck? How did they beat the best team in the world and in amazing fashion, the best of 5? That's the outlier. Look at the rest of their time together and the time before that. There's no real pattern connecting back to that. They go to ESL Pro League Season 7 finals, the last tournament they had with Exist. They made it to top 4, lost to Astralis again in the semi-finals. Okay, fair enough. No shame in losing to Astralis. Why were you playing Astralis in the semis? Yeah. That's right. Na'Vi took care of you. So already you're losing to Na'Vi, a team that themselves were still fixing themselves, heading towards being a legit 2 or 3 team in the world. I think FaZe, with Olof in the team, would have been a much, much more competitive team to potentially beat that Na'Vi squad, to actually have the read on them and figure out what they were going to do. Didn't have many options. They lost them. Then they lost to Australia, certainly in the semis. Nothing you can do about that, really. It's unreasonable to expect a team with a standing to beat Astralis. They already did it once, and that was amazing. Then Exist goes out of the lineup. In comes Croman. Now, first of all, loads of people were saying, Exist doing well in this lineup. Maybe they should keep him. Why did everyone's tune change all of a sudden when Croman came in? Because first of all, the results were just as good, if not better, with Croman in the lineup, except they didn't win a massive title in the same way they did at Sydney. But he actually looked like a better player. He contributed more in terms of fragging. So all of a sudden, everyone forgot about Exist, who's gone a Fnatic, and everyone was mad at that. And everyone was in love with Croman now. Croman, they came in, they played ECS Season 5, where they finished top 4 again. Okay, top 4 looks good on paper. Until you realise, in their group, the easiest group of the tournament, they had Luminosity from Brazil, and we're not talking about the one from 2 years ago, so dogshit team, well, at least hasn't proven anything. You had NRG, okay, a team on the rise, just finished second at Star Series, but a team with a lot of holes in there, and only really beating Team Liquid's what got them that place. And then you had G2 Esports, first ever tournament with Existence and Smith Spark, even admitted we haven't had full practice time, we haven't implemented all our tactics, we're doing a lot of things from the old lineup. That should be an easy group win right there. They didn't win the group because they lost the upper bracket best of 1 to NRG on cash, actually one of the strongest maps for Carrigan's FaZe teams in 2018. They lost that one, and then they beat up the G2 team where Kenny S went ham for 1 map, and that was it. So there we go. They get to the semis. Okay, you know what? In the semis, they get drawn against Astralis again. Sure, these are tough draws. Anytime you get Astralis, you're probably going to go out of the tournament. They lose to them there. So all in all, not a particularly good tournament run. Nothing crazy you did there. You just lost to Astralis, and you lost an unexpected best of 1 NRG. Now, that can happen, but nothing crazy, nothing amazing there. You go to ESL 1 Belo Horizonte, a tournament with no Astralis, number 1 team in the world, no Na'Vi, very strong team. A tournament where Mouse Sports, also one of the top teams, has a stand-in, and a stand-in for their best player. They have nothing. Guy's a washed-up ex-pro from the NA, playing instead of Oscar, one of the best players in the world, and the pivotal talismanic star player of Mouse Sports, where they tend to go as Oscar goes also. So I'm not really surprised they wouldn't lose to a Mouse Sports team. You had Team Liquid was one of the main squads that had a full lineup there. They were shitting the bed already starting to hit their sort of slump. SK Gaming, again, big underwhelming team, despite the fact that the name still evokes memories in your mind. Maybe they could get it together and do something, but they don't. Last tournament is the one that just happened now, ESL 1 Cologne, where they finished top 4, and yes, this time they were favoured to make the final. Maybe they even could have won the tournament. But they had this shocking loss to Big in the semi-finals. Close fashion. They lost these maps close. These weren't getting blown out at all. Would they have beaten Na'Vi in the final? I don't know if they would in a best of 5. I think that's probably not reasonable. But making the final definitely was a possibility. And actually, the fact that you were playing against Astralis might have invoked the Astralis psychological aspect, and that might have helped you. But that's really about all you can say. So the placings all look dynamite. I mean, all the placings are top 4, except for Marseille, where you played the winner in the round of 8. And you even have 2 event victories in there. 1 big event, IEM Sydney. 1 smaller event, Belo Horizonte. So very, very solid run. But actually, it's amazing in the context of having a stand-in. and defies expectations of what should be possible with the standing. I think it's only because you've got this in-game leader, this system, and star players like Guardian and Nico who've been super carries. But realistically, I don't think you can expect much more from the squad. I mean, they could have lost Sydney way earlier. They could have gone out absolutely in the semi-finals. They obviously could have lost the final, so it could have gone worse there. There are practically no other tournaments I think they could have won. I mean, maybe Cologne if they make it to the final. But even then, I think beating Navi in a best of 5, I don't think that would actually be too doable at this point in time. I think Navi would actually have been favoured of them because they're a real squad with a real map pool. You go and look at Belo Horizonte, the tournament they won. They almost lost that tournament. This is a tournament where absolutely they could have lost that best of 5 to Mouse Sports. Then you look at the fact that the placings all look dynamite, and they've certainly beaten some good teams, the Fanatics of the world, Astralis. These are all really good teams. Mouse Sports. Problem is, you go and you look at some of the teams they lost to in that time period. They lost a best of 3 to the FNS Cloud9. They lost a best of 3 to Renegades, not with NAF flying. Remember, this is in 2018. They almost lost to Greyhound, that semi-unknown team from Australia. They went 3 maps with Tai Lu and still beat them, but lost a map to them. They had a lot of results that, if you add up just the results, show you that the eye test says this wasn't like a legit number 2 team in the world. They were by placing and ranking, and in part because the rest of the scene was so bad. But whereas the Astralis are doing amazing shit and Navi's looking really, really good and solid, a lot of what FaZe did was very up and down, and they caught the right breaks of when they got their big wins, and when they got their losses, they happened to be in tournament formats where it wasn't as big a deal. We had the ESL format where you can lose in the group. You have the double elim component. It's not until you get to the semis and quarters that you're really on your last life, as it were. Then you got to look at the fact that, look at their standings. Okay, so Exist was just a veteran player who can be fairly decently clutch under certain circumstances, but needs someone to carry him in terms of fragging and can just fill a role. Okay, many players can do that. Many players can do a better job of that. Croman, solid player, but nothing special. So let's ask ourselves, why did they succeed? First of all, as I said, I think there's a psychological component. Players that are amazing players and should be in the number 1 team in the world were told, you're not expected to do anything, do what you can, play off just your own skill, and then you don't have any pressure. So people like Nico and Guardian, they can produce results. We already know with underdog teams where they can go as far as they want. I think Nico especially stepped up as a carry player. In early 2018, he looked at one of the players where, for whatever reason, maybe it was the mental stress of losing all those finals and being favoured to win and not winning. I don't know what it was, but he had some tournaments that were a bit off, or he had matches that were a bit off. He obviously had some finals that were a bit humdrum. Not bad, but a bit humdrum for what you expect from a potential greatest player of all time. In all the tournaments they had the stand-in, this guy was fucking going off. Like some of the best tournament runs we've seen from an individual player for the last 1 or 2 years, some really, really strong performances. He's even said as much in interviews that knowing they had a standing kind of made him realise he had to do more. More the burden was on him. Likewise, Guardian had some amazing tournaments, not even in terms in just the numbers. Some of the clutches this guy won, some of the maps this guy took over were essential to even getting them out of trouble against lesser teams or winning those big maps against the big name teams, some of them who weren't necessarily the best. For me, he's the reason they won that IM Sydney final. Then you got to look, and by the way, was actually the main player who seemed to be lacking as they went deep at ESL Cologne. I think really got outplayed in the big series. Then Rain actually hadn't had a very good year at all, but by the time it came to Cologne, he came online. He had a really good performance. These are the star players. These are the amazing talents, and they were the ones who carried them to these results, along with the system of Carrigan. The standings didn't really do that much altogether. Then you got to look at the fact they have been playing weaker opposition. I mean, the scene has been in flux practically the whole time they've had the stand-ins. From the time they got their stand-ins, when Astralis took over and started dominating, Na'Vi started getting stronger. Everyone else has had issues. SK's fallen off event by event by event and have stabilised and plateaued at a much lower level. We're talking like bottom half of the top 10 at best. Mouse Sports has become stagnant in their map pool, seemingly look as though they've hit their hard ceiling. Now they've made a roster move, which has seemingly taken them down a level. Team Liquid's dropped off. They've actually pissed away all that potential they seemed to have before. Fnatic's been dying out, hasn't been able to live up to championship glory, which wasn't really that legit anyway, if I'm being honest. Who else is there in the scene? Who else is there that's supposed to contend? NRG on the rise, sort of, but do they have the real firepower to make it? Not really. You know, the scene's kind of a mess right now. G2, brand new lineup. North, still a bit of a mess. Heroic, no one really knows what's going on with that team. NiP, made roster moves. Have they improved them? Not really. Was the level that good anyway? Not really. bottom end of the top 10 is pretty rocky right now. So the fact that they can win out events or outplace them, that's not really that crazy, actually. Then you got to look at the fact that I personally think if they'd have had olofmeister this whole time, I think they'd have won more events, or they'd have won better events. I think they might even have already had the Grand Slam. I think actually it's an indictment of where the scene was at, that just having some superstars like Guardian and Nico and a good in-game leader who can play a loose style was enough to make an incomplete lineup, which is even changing players, do that kind of a run of top fours and even win tournaments against what's supposed to be the best teams in the world. But that's how many of the teams were a mess. And they won a couple of big games against the teams that weren't. So olofmeister returning, I think, is a massive plus for the team. He did a lot more than just fragging. He was a clutch player. He could even entry at times. He worked well with the others. He clearly had sacrificed his star role to help the likes of the Nikos and the Guardians of the World succeed. So I think he did a lot more for the team structure, and he had a winner's mentality because he is a major winner. He has won many, many times before, and maybe he's trying to help instill that in the rest of them. I personally hope the biggest knock-on effect of Olof coming back is that Nico retains this superstar form. Because if he does, and they bring olofmeister back and integrate him like he was before, this can be the number one team in the world. They can challenge Astralis legitimately every tournament all the way from here on out. And they can battle for the Grand Slam, because there'll be more chances for that. And they can also go ahead and battle in terms of winning majors and being the number one team. I think it's absolutely possible. What I like is, if they cap this lineup out, which they hadn't done before, because as I said, Nico had some tournaments, he wasn't as good, Rain fell off. They could be a very interesting counter to Astralis, because I've seen from the way that teams like G2 played against Astralis, teams like Na'Vi played against Astralis, that if you're willing to have similar level of depth in terms of nade usage, you can counter Astralis, but you can also counter Astralis with raw firepower. I think that's what something of what Na'Vi was able to do. Play aggressively against those slow setups of Astralis, make them use their utility earlier in the round to gain map control, make them have to be on their guard when they're doing a very, very slow setup outside of sight, and you attack into them so that they can't just decide when they execute on you. You force the execution, or you force them to fight for that ground. I think that's something you saw. Playing without nades might even be an option on T-side sometimes. Make use of the fact you've got these mad skilled players. Make it harder to read when you're going to attack. Do lots of fast burst tactics, as you saw from some of the squads. I even think you look at the rest of the scene right now and how they're set up. FaZe Clan with olofmeister has a very nice stylistic approach to all these other squads, because they should be the best skill-based team in the game again. Most spots has fallen off. Team Liquid's having their own problems. They've got a nice counter to the tactical teams, the G2s, Astralis is the big of the world, if they can max out the skill level, because that will always be, it'll never be one-sided as to whether tactical or very, very strong skilled teams win. It depends on exactly your personnel matchup, and in this case, the maps. And we know that their map pool was getting better when they had olofmeister in, even though the results weren't always. They still have a lot of the same issues, I think, even without Olof, that they will have when he comes back. So, yes, they can choke in close games. We know that, especially if they're on the T side, especially if it's a deciding map, especially if it's a scenario where they think to themselves, we've got all these star players, surely we'll win, instead of being decisive and making the big play or the big hero call of it on the terrorist side to win a particular one. We've seen them lose like that. They're still probably going to be godlike front runners, which is what they were able to do with the stand-ins. They were obviously amazing at it. It's so powerful. We've seen Astralis do it from a tactical end and having all their players on the same page. FaZe can do it from a pure skill aspect. That can still exist. I think their map pool also, if they play it right, can become a lot more complete. Obviously, Cobblestone went out around the time that we got the stand-ins, which is another reason I think the olofmeister lamp would have been even more successful if it had played instead of the stand-ins. And you look at the fact that, okay, what really have they got issues with? Nuke if forced to play it, but that's with stand-ins. Who knows what it would have been like with olofmeister? It was looking half decent. Train, they've never really got a good feel for that map. I think that map's probably just always going to haunt them and never be that great a map. Their cash had gotten very strong and remained very strong, even when they lost olofmeister. I think that's a fantastic map to be able to play right now. I think the fact that they had all the success on Dust 2 when they were forced to play it with olofmeister, I think you can put your head down on that one, get much better on that one. All of a sudden, you're in a world where it's not the Inferno Mirage world that it was 6 to 9 months ago. There's plenty of teams out there you can match up well with if you can win these maps, and there is no Cobblestone anymore. So you can even be more tricky if you're Carrigan with the pick ban, but he never got a chance to, because when Cobblestone went out was when he had to use all these stand-ins. He's already devoting all his time to trying to figure out how to get an edge on this particular team without much practice on his part, and knowing that some of the other squads are more complete teams with a full style, whereas I'm working with a makeshift lineup. So I personally think the return of olofmeister is a great thing. I don't don't know how he individually is going to play or where his head's been at. That's a concern for me. But the fact they could do so much with standing suggests it won't be an issue. And I could see it building FaZe Clan back up to being an absolutely world-beating team that would be very interesting as a true rival for Astralis. Na'Vi has already shown that they can be a rival for Astralis, that they're getting it together, but it takes everything out of them to be able to beat them. FaZe Clan is a team where this could be a nice stylistic matchup because we can't wait for the SKs, MIBR now, Team Liquid, Mousesports to get their shit together. FaZe Clan can do it tomorrow if Olof comes back in the right form. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Daniel Yordanov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter and Travis Greb, with a special thanks going out to Jerky's Minion. Want teasers for my upcoming content? To ask a question for my monthly AMA? How about taking part in a discussion with me about esports? Or perhaps you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Become a part of the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.